Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. This is going to be a really great conversation, especially for our dealers who are interested in, maintaining and retaining an engaged workforce.
Yeah, I mean, talent has been such a topic, especially since COVID and everything that's transpired. So I'm really excited to have you on. Thanks, Matt. Thanks. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark and Elliot. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so before we get into the questions and really start to learn about some tactics and strategies, tell us a little bit about your background, because you've had an interesting journey. First of all, thank you for your service in the U.S. Marines.
Yeah, thank you.
You've been stationed all over the world. You became an Arabic linguist, which is super interesting in and of itself. But tell us how you made that jump into being a talent optimization expert. And I believe you call yourself the godfather of talent optimization. So where did that come from?
Yeah, that's a long and winding journey, isn't it? Yeah,
It sure is.
Yeah, it's funny. From the time I'd say I was in fifth grade, I knew I wanted to be a Marine. I think that's a little bit unusual, but as I got older and I knew I was getting closer, I also developed this love of languages. So when I enlisted, I definitely knew I wanted to be a linguist. What I found is that when you show up, you can have your own ideas about how that's going to go, but they kind of decide for you. So I thought I would study Russian. They said, nope, Arabic it is.
Wow.
So I was out in Monterey, California at the Defense Language Institute, which was great. And I met my bride there. She's a Marine too.
Oh, no way.
She's a Spanish linguist. So yeah, I really was proud to serve, and I was very happy to go in. And I was also happy to get out. When it was time to transition to civilian life, I knew that as a 27-year-old freshman, that was going to be a real problem. So I decided to study in psychology, and I ended up getting my bachelor's degree the same month that I got out of the service. And so I was able to go straight to graduate school, thankfully, to study business and technology. And I just fell in love with the world of work. And the biggest surprise that I had was that from the time I joined the Marines, they jammed into my hands this book on leadership principles. And I thought, man, this is how adults learn about leadership. This is great. And when I got to the civilian world, I'm like, I'm ready for more leadership development. And they're like, what are you talking about? Like, that's not a thing here. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. So it was really on my own. So I started hitting audiobooks and just learning everything I could about leadership and professional development and just being good at the people part of business. And I was pleased to go on and study at the PhD level and learn all about leadership and coaching and these sorts of things, and just realize how much of a need there is in organizations for it. So fast forward to becoming the godfather of talent optimization. Talent optimization is an amazing discipline. It really balances equally the business aspects of an organization as well as its people aspects. And I tend to find that sometimes the HR function will focus on the people side really well, but may not have as tight of a hold on the business. Business people tend to get focused, obviously, on the technical bits, but may not be so great at people. And talent optimization balances that out. And as far as being the godfather, that's just having some fun and trying to call attention to the fact that I like to say talent optimization is an option. It's an offer you can't refuse, right?
That's great.
So what actually, it's funny, as you're speaking, I probably realize I know very little about what talent optimization actually means.
Yeah, 100%.
What is it? What is incorporated within talent optimization?
Yeah, I always like to start when I'm working with leaders to say, let's talk about the business strategy. What needs to happen in the next 18 to 24 months for your organization to be successful? That's all future focused, right? Then the other question I ask is, okay, what's happened over the last 12 months? And that's all about business results. And what I find is that oftentimes, if the strategy doesn't manifest in terms of the results that we wanted, it's because we skipped the people parts that are in the middle. And so it's really a leadership framework. It's really a way of thinking about your people practices, because if you don't get the people part right, you can have the best strategy in the world. It's not going to happen, right? So when you break it down, you say, what do we need to get right when it comes to people part of an organization? It really comes down to four things. It's design winning teams, hire top talent, inspire people to greatness, and diagnose people problems so that we can get them fixed. Those four major aptitudes, as I call them, are what we really have to get right. And that's what really allows the business strategy to flow as naturally into business results. And the reason that it's so important is because you start to see all these changes like sales transformation, digital transformation that's affecting, in your case, in your industry. We've got to get the people part right.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're taking the notion of talent to way beyond the function of HR.
Oh, definitely. Yes.
Right. And which is sort of a newer concept, and really your talent becomes part of your strategy. Am I hearing that, understand that right?
Absolutely. I think it always has been, but I think that a lot of times leaders can be forgiven for focusing on the technical aspects of their business, but we really have to see that it's an abdication of our responsibility as leaders if we don't learn how to lead people. We manage things, but we lead people. This is what Grace Hopper once said, and I believe it through and through. What happens is if we try to treat either in isolation, then we're going to get suboptimal results. And the way I like to think about it is that every business problem is a people problem, right? And therefore, every business opportunity is a people opportunity. And to pretend like the two operate in isolation from one another, it just doesn't get us the results we want. So yeah, it's a new approach in many ways, but it's so doable. This is the best thing about it. It's not rocket science. We just need to use the data and the techniques that we know how to do. We just need to bring them into the business.
So Matt, let's talk a little bit about those techniques. And, I love how you outlined those 4 key points. And in particular, when you think about the automotive business and dealerships, you hear a lot about turnover.
Yeah.
And, clearly we're in a very highly competitive labor market. And, depending on the brand or the position within the dealership, we've seen turnover as high as, 21% in some cases.
Oh, and I think that's a low number.
Yeah. And, it costs a lot for that process to continue to happen, because to acquire talent, and that price has increased in spending what it takes to acquire associates in your organization. So if you're a dealer and you're sitting back and you're seeing this happen, how do you mitigate turnover?
Yeah, we have to remember that whenever we talk about people doing work in organizations, it happens in layers. So the very first layer is the layer of the individual. We want to make sure that we understand the job that we're going to be hiring them into, and make sure we hire a person who's the best natural fit for that role. I've seen so many times where we have maybe extroverted people who get hired into roles that have no people contact. Right. And then they get frustrated, and then they keep wandering away from the service bay, and they want to talk to the customers, and you're like, get back to work. And then it's just like, okay, that's a natural outcome for somebody who's like, well, I didn't really know myself. And so I applied for a job because I thought I could make a buck. And then it turns out I really liked other parts of the job. So at that point, it's really making sure that we hire somebody who's a natural fit for the role. A lot of times what you find too, and is better than I do, inside the automotive world and inside the dealer, you have teams of people working together. You've got digital marketing, you're working with the sales staff on the floor, the service department, everything, finance, all of it. And so it's a team-based sport, if you will. And so team dynamics become really important, and making sure people feel that they're part of the team, that they can be themselves, that there's a celebration of what they're bringing to the table, and that they're not being overlooked by some other part of the business. That becomes a really important factor in determining retention as well. And then finally, at the level of the dealer itself, and talking about mission and purpose, and trying to find people who help people feel like they're a part of something. That we all have this natural human desire to be part of something bigger than ourselves. It's just wired into us. But too often, organizations kind of overlook that to focus on the day-to-day. And when those people don't have that need met, they're going to go somewhere else to try to find it. Or they're going to clock out early and go find it in some other way.
I love how you just summed that up. Yeah. I mean, what I heard 3 things. I heard, putting people in their natural best opportunity for success, right?
Definitely.
Indexing on recognition and ensuring you're recognizing people for the work they do, and then making them feel part of something bigger is the 3 things that I heard. What's interesting is what I don't hear you talking about, and what I hear so many dealers index to, is the pay plan.
Yeah.
It's all about the money, right? All about the money. And I guess if I'm hearing you, I guess what you didn't mention is making sure that rewards are highly, and maybe we're talking about turnover, right? I think a lot of dealers index towards pay plans, but I think what you're saying is it can be well beyond that in order to keep associates.
100%. I feel like when you think about some of the basic needs that we have, like oxygen and food, you need enough. Otherwise, it becomes a big problem. But once you have enough, I mean, beyond a certain point, it's not a big motivator anymore. Extra sandwiches in the break room, are only going to go so far. So I think that's where it gets down to the fact that we index on money because it's easy to think about and talk about that. And a lot of times in an exit interview, they'll say, oh, I went to someplace else for more money. But in reality, it's because what they're not telling you. They actually went somewhere else because they felt a better sense of connection to the culture. They felt they were going to be more respected. It's just easier to talk about and index on some of those things. And you feel like, well, I'll just write a check and the problem will go away.
Right.
It turns out not to be the case. And I think what's happened is that jobs in our society have evolved to the point where, especially entry-level workers in many situations, can get their basic needs financially met in a lot of different ways. They've got the gig economy now. They've got lots of options. So the competition changed overnight. For an auto dealer with the digital parts of your business where maybe you can work remotely, you're now competing with what, the world? Like, oh my gosh, it's totally different, like where people can do their work. But even for, others who are deciding, like, do I want to, drive for DoorDash or do I want to, come into work? That's tough. And so I feel like money is more portable in some cases, job to job. That's why when you get to, I've got a team, I'm a part of something, we're doing something important here, I'm respected, those things carry a lot more weight. If you're underpaying people, don't expect to have top talent. But if you're paying market, it's just not enough anymore.
So Matt, that's really interesting because if you could get those things right, what business owners and dealers probably should realize is those things are going to translate into business results.
100%.
Right? And it's not just about the pay plan. And the motivators behind doing a really great job aren't necessarily just your paycheck, but feeling a part of a team and being engaged and appreciated. But in particular, we talk a lot about, the satisfaction of a customer, and that's super important to dealers. Talk a little bit.
A running theme here.
Yeah, we've been talking about it a lot.
Yeah, it's been a theme here on the podcast.
It's a good one.
Talk a little bit about how that employee tenure and that engaged employee could absolutely translate to highly satisfied customers.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I think when you go through and you're having a bad day at work, and unfortunately there's too many people who do, right? What's going to happen as a natural byproduct is either that you're going to withdraw from the work, right, which we don't want to see, or you're going to start taking it out on your coworkers. Heaven forbid you actually take it out on a customer. Oh my gosh, that'd be terrible. But you take it home to your family too. So the reality is when we hire people for work that they're naturally wired to do, and we treat them well and we fulfill their needs, that goodwill reverses that trend and it spills out. So now I'm feeling better about the work I do. I'm going to be that much more engaged when I'm talking to a customer, which we care about, right? I don't have all that baggage with me as far as I'm frustrated because I'm being overlooked. I'm not appreciated. Somebody just, demeaned something that I did that was important to me. And I've got that in the back of my mind. I'm trying not to let it come out in this customer interaction, but it's hard not to. Right. So I feel like only good things happen when we start to meet those needs.
Yeah. So I want to go back to what you talked about at the beginning here with, getting that, putting an extrovert in an introverted role is it's a recipe for disaster. How do companies, how do you test for that, right? How do you know what someone's natural tendencies are in order to make that perfect fit, if you will, with matching the talent with the job function?
Yeah, there's two primary ways. One is terrible, and the other is better. The terrible way, and the most common way probably, is to go by gut. I just read the person, I looked them in the eye, one of these things. They had a firm handshake, so I think they're the right person for the job. And it always, our gut always leads us astray. Fortunately, and there's not even new science. We're talking about 60 plus years of science that allows us to understand people and how they're naturally configured in terms of their personality traits and their needs. And that's a much more accurate way of getting a reading. And there's many to choose from. The company that I work for, the Predictive Index, has one that's been in the market for 60 plus years. And it's just really great at being a very brief assessment. It doesn't take very long, but it gives us a very clean read on an individual and allows us to understand where there's natural fits to the work we're asking them to do and where there might be gaps. Right. And it's important to point out that a gap isn't necessarily an issue. It's just that as the hiring manager, I own those gaps. I have to provide coaching. I have to provide development. I provide encouragement to help them bridge a gap. I don't have to have 100% fit, but if I have a gap, then I need to know about it and I need to take active steps to remedy that with that individual over time.
And Matt, if you're from the perspective of someone at a dealership, whether they are a manager or an owner, going back to what Elliot said about this is not just an HR function. Talk a little bit about how someone could get educated fairly quickly to be able to do something like this and hire the right people.
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like it's often very daunting when you're a general manager or even a business owner to start to think about when you're thinking about, well, how much money am I going to make? And then, really, how do I get started in something like this? It's a great question, Mark.
Yeah, I think caring is the first part, to really understand that this is a part of the job. No matter what level of seniority you are, we have leaders at every level in organizations. We need to look at it that way. And if you're going to be a leader, part of your responsibility is to understand that people part. So whether you there's so many great podcasts and books and things you can start with, but the nature of the tools that you use also can help. So as an example, the tool set that I'm most familiar with, we have something called a manager strategy guide. And it's a way to sit down and say, okay, based on who this individual is and who they naturally are, how can I have a quick set of instructions that says, are you meeting this person's needs in the following ways? And I can sit down and say, yes, I am, or no, I'm not. This is great information. I didn't understand that this is something they needed. And so now I can provide that for them. So in that case, the tooling and the job aids can complement what you might be learning or what your experience might be getting the people part right.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up leadership, Matt, because so much of this has to do with leadership styles and what traits people should have, whether you're a general manager or an F&I manager. If you're interacting with people, there are certain traits that you should work on. Talk a bit about how that's evolved, over the years and your experience, in particular with COVID's impact on the workforce. What are some important, leadership styles and traits that you think really matter for a business to have today?
Yeah, I think that some of the traits that have never gone out of style, they've always been critical, are being able to have a vision for the future and communicate, articulate that. Like I'm talking about, like when you're leading a team, as an example, you need to say, here's something we need to accomplish and help them see themselves as a part of it. More recently, what we started to see are the needs for reaching people and connecting with them in a different way. So if you have somebody who's a remote worker, your communication style is different. The nature of how you build culture and how you help them feel a part of something has to change somewhat. And it's important to recognize that. I also think that the newer workers, especially the early career people now, they're, kind of the later stage millennials and certainly Gen Z, have an entirely different set of expectations when it comes to openness, inclusivity, trust, and transparency. And I think that it's really important that we acknowledge that the senior leaders in organizations who tend to be a little bit older have a different set of generational values that we need to understand, that it's not right or wrong. It's just that we have a different context in which we grew up, right? So by the time we got to millennials, we would say, well, we want to hear you and let's listen to what you have to say. But now Gen Z says, we actually, not only do we expect you to listen to us, we expect you to do something about it. And Gen X, like myself, is like, what? Wasn't it enough to just listen? And you're like, no, we want you to change things. And we're like, oh my gosh, that's a whole different level. So it's like, it's fun to see the new generation of leaders come in and to have something that they're steering us toward. Transparency is a great example. I was counseling an executive team a couple of weeks ago, and they talked about transparency, and they said, we provide a lot of transparency. And I said, yes, okay. You tell about the good stuff, the wins. Yes, customer wins. We absolutely share that. I said, what about the bad stuff? They're like, oh, yeah, no, we don't really talk about what's concerning us in the business, or when we lost a customer, we would never publicly announce that. I'm like, people see right through that. This is a generation that grew up on the internet. They sense out that stuff very, very quickly. So you have to be transparent with the good and the bad. And leaders I talk to today struggle sometimes to make themselves vulnerable and say, I'm taking a mental health day because I had to put my kids on Zoom school and it's really stressful, or whatever it might be. It's new to some leaders to provide that level of access and transparency and demonstrate that kind of integrity, but it's so powerful when we do. If we make ourselves human as leaders, we can connect with all the generations.
Yeah, I love that. The humanistic side of leadership. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's definitely more modern. I mean, it's not something that was part of that leadership styles in the 70s, 80s, and really even the 90s to a degree. It's much more of a modern concept. But
well, and to your point though, too, the COVID pandemic and the resulting aftermath has rehumanized us. It helped us juggle our priorities. It had us think about what really matters. And that's why organizations are well positioned to make those critical connections, but they have to operate differently. People now have what I call the 3 Bs. They're the killer bees, which is being, belonging, and something bigger than myself. These are the higher order needs that we have come to experience as a result of the pandemic and other societal changes. And when we don't meet those needs as an organization, it kills productivity, it kills performance, it kills our intent to stay. That's why I call them the killer bees, because we need to meet these needs. And it's really the pandemic and other changes that brought that on.
Wow. Well, I love it. Man, you have the catchphrases.
That's right.
I know
I
you
don't call the Godfather for nothing.
Yeah,
I know, right? It helps make things memorable because if it sticks in there in the old memory circuits, then you have a better chance of actually honoring it. So yeah, I like it.
I wonder if that's some of your linguistic training coming back.
Could be.
Yeah. Shifting gears a little bit, we love to ask folks like you that come on the podcast that are not specific to automotive. And, this is an automotive related podcast. And, but what we recognize is that while you may not be in the auto industry, you're an auto consumer.
Definitely.
And so, we all, like we said, customer satisfaction has been a running theme, customer experience, and you're a customer, you're a car customer. So I guess, I assume you've purchased a car before. What is your experience in a car dealership? What do you feel as those leadership opportunities as a consumer, right? As an observer of the industry, what do you feel when you go in, when you buy a car?
And in particular, your interaction with the people at a dealership.
Exactly.
What can dealers do differently to maybe enhance that experience for customers that you've noticed?
Yeah, I have 3 teenage drivers, so my driveway looks like a used car dealership right now. Over the last 5 to 7 years, I've had a lot of experience buying a variety of different cars, and always with the people interactions. Absolutely. And when I go to a dealership and I end up talking to a sales professional, sometimes I get some that are a little bit from the old days that I remember from my earlier buying experiences, where unfortunately there's I have a lot of the information they're trying to give me already. I know exactly what I want, but they're trying to run their process versus mine. Unfortunately, more recently, I've had the opposite experience. Wow. Where they know exactly how much information I have, and they're just trying to help me negotiate my buying process. And they know there's things that I can't do on my own, and they're there to help me build that bridge. And it was a much more positive experience.
That's great. I mean, that's really great to hear. I think we see that in the industry, even though it's a slow churn, but it's really great to hear that your experience has been positive. If you could share a little bit, how have your kids thought about the car buying experience? Right. Because again, thinking about those generational gaps, right? Were they a part of the experience? Did they have an influence on you? How did that manifest itself?
Yeah, most of their experience with the dealerships has been in the servicing part of the show. So they weren't there for the purchase as much, but they're of an age where I could tell them, hey, look, if your car needs to be serviced, then you go take care of that. I want you to have that experience of working with people.
Sure.
And in this case, one of the more recent experience I can remember, they had a fabulous experience with it. And in going in and being treated really well, and having the dealership had Wi-Fi, which was really important to them. They could get their life taken care of. So that part was very good. And the people treating them with respect. This is the thing for my young kids are Gen Z people. And for them to have interactions with people who treat them not as well, you don't know what you're doing and all this stuff. That was really important to them.
And I got to ask the question because it's something that is definitely an industry topic. Did they even want to drive? Right? We hear about that quite a bit, where teenagers don't even want to drive. They don't want a car. Was that your experience with your children?
Yeah, with my children, I didn't give them the option. I was done driving for sure. Remember, these are the kids of Marines, right?
Right.
There's a very specific way we're doing things. It's called you do stuff yourself. But I do have a niece. She does not have any interest in driving whatsoever. And I found that very surprising to me. And I would say even with my own kids, some of them took to it, no problem. Others were like, okay, well, if you're making me, I'll learn how to do it. But I think once they get the independence of being able to go around, they really appreciate that. And I was pleased to be able to give them, access to vehicles, which helped my sanity. But it it's definitely something that I think that they express that independence. But if we had lived in a big city, that probably would have been a lot less likely that they would need to or want to drive. And I think it is a fascinating trend, isn't it?
But Matt, something that I'm picking up from what you're talking about here is you look at, your children, driving is not their first thought. And, when I was turning of driving age, I couldn't wait to get a car.
Me too.
But it's different now. And you talked about how when they went to service their vehicles, they were expecting to be respected. So I think those two things combined make it even more important for a dealer or a business owner in the automotive world to make sure their people are engaged in what they do, because they're dealing with customers who aren't going to tolerate a bad experience.
Definitely. And customers have a choice. And even if they're fiercely brand loyal, they still have a choice within a certain radius in most cases. So I feel like, making sure that you never know who's on the other side of that, because if my kid went in and had a bad experience, you might not know that I'm in the market for a car as the parent. And all of a sudden, if they have a bad experience, I'm not going in there to buy from that dealer. And the opposite can be true too. In my family, we tend to be pretty brand loyal, and it works out because we had a great experience at the dealership. And what we had, it was a very, what I would call a team-based experience, where I worked with the sales professional as well as with the finance team, and also in the owner. And I'll extend that team to be the brand of the auto itself, because I had the app. And all of a sudden they showed me how to use the app. And it is fabulous to think about the technology that's in these cars now. And so it was truly a situation where the brand was an extension of the dealership. Because to me, I don't really know the difference and how your industry is really set up. I just think this is all part of just that car, that vehicle. Sometimes, that's on the factory or that's on this. You're like, that doesn't matter to me. I'm the consumer. You have to protect me from all that. In this case, they did.
I'm sure any OEM executive listening to that comment is hoping it's their brand.
Sure. That's the holy grail, right there.
It is the holy grail. But I think it's time, Mark.
I think so. So Matt, I don't know if you've heard about this segment of our podcast that we like to say is sweeping the nation.
Absolutely.
Among automotive podcasts. We call it a sure thing. So it's Elliot here, has traveled all over the automotive business and has some hot takes. So we like to test those hot takes with our guest. And, sometimes he hits it out of the park. Sometimes he swings and misses, but we keep trying.
Yes. And today it's a special edition of A Sure Thing, because we're going to focus more on some fun and leadership than automotive. But I think everything we've been talking about is applicable to automotive, and probably hyper applicable in the sense that, we have a perception of a consumer experience issue. We have a turnover challenge as well. And we have a challenge attracting people to our industry because of some of those perceptions as well. So everything we've talked about, very valuable information,
sure.
Matt. So thank you.
Absolutely.
But I got to say, when I think about leadership and, I think about what are the traits that matter the most. And, I think about, these prolific innovators, Elon Musk, brilliant people, right? Bill Gates, these people who are brilliant. But I think about leadership and that sort of that academic intelligence or just that sheer brilliance is people equate that to leadership. But I believe that emotional intelligence is the single most important leadership trait. Sure thing or not a sure thing?
That's the hot take, Matt. What do you think?
I'll go sure thing on that one. I'll go because if I can just embiggen it just a tiny little bit and say it's really in line with that being a human leader, emotional intelligence, absolutely. Being able to make that human connection, that is absolutely a sure thing, more than ever.
One for one.
Well, Mark, would you agree with that as well?
100%. I mean, I think we've heard a lot of leadership experiences over the years in our conversations, and just the ability to connect with people is probably one of the most important factors as a leader.
I think it's the most ironic thing, but what I've come to discover is that it is the willingness to be selfless that makes a great leader. We are just crammed into these people coming up in the ranks that it's all about you and you got to learn this and you got to do this and you all the time. And they hear that and they think, okay, but the more you can let that part go and you put your ego aside and you make yourself all about that other individual, that's the greatest leaders that you find.
Yeah. So, building upon that for question number 2 here, we talked about it a bit, and really, I think we've mixed both topics, but the question of nature versus nurture in terms of leadership and developing people. And, but I believe that nurture can overcome nature when it comes to developing people in a business setting and making things happen. So yes, I believe nurture to be more important than nature in the business leadership setting. Sure thing or not a sure thing?
I'm going to have to say not a sure thing on that one.
Oh,
in the sense,
okay. Tell me
only
more.
Only because you said it's more important. And I think in my experience, it's equally important. Tie goes to the runner, right? Which is the fact that what we have to recognize is that leadership, it can be practiced by anyone, right? Regardless of your nature and, kind of what the skills you were born with. You can always develop them through nurture. That's true. But I think a lot of times I see people who are, maybe they're naturally a little bit more introverted, a little more reserved. And they think, well, in order to be a leader, I have to be boisterous and I have to stand up in the front and do something unnatural. And that never works. Instead, I'd like to see that natural capability and tendency flow through your leadership. And maybe there is some nurture, absolutely, that we have to learn skills and modify and self-coach and receive coaching. So it's absolutely important. But I have a really hard time saying either one is more important than the other. I think the two can work together in harmony. And a lot of times by removing some of the baggage and the shoulds and all that stuff, we can allow a more natural leadership style that we were born with really flow through into the work we do with our people. Tie goes to the runner.
Response to your hot take.
Very. And what a great way to tell me I'm wrong. I love it. So cool. Do we have time for 2 more?
We sure do.
Because I have 2 fun ones.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. So, we talked a bit about your Marine service and your wife's service. And, one thing we like to talk about a lot is pop culture on this. And so I believe that Top Gun is the single best military movie of all time.
The new one or the original?
The original.
Okay.
I did like the new one.
Okay.
But I'm an OG with Top Gun. I still go with the back one. But I believe Top Gun to be the best military movie of all time. Matt, sure thing or not a sure thing?
That's not a sure thing.
Thank
that
you.
movie, it was the most iconic, could be the most iconic military movie ever. I would definitely agree with that. But when you think about the actual military aspects, I can't even remember what happened. They were fighting over something. And I have no recollection as to what the problem even was. So that can't be the best. I don't know what it is, but it can't be that one.
I'm going to throw out Saving Private Ryan as the best military movie of all time.
I think it won Best Picture.
Yep, I believe so. Matt?
It's funny that as a genre, even when you think about military movies, it's like, well, which angle? Certainly Saving Private Ryan was great, and there's so many military movies that take different angles of it. It's pretty good. But
what would be your favorite, Matt? Just
man,
as a
Marine.
Yeah.
It's funny. I actually don't enjoy military movies all that much. But it's kind of funny. When I was growing up as a kid, movies like Platoon and Full Metal Jacket were very real. They were very gritty. And so they're definitely very memorable for me. But if they were on again, I wouldn't watch them now. But, I do like the military movies that depict something a little bit more realistic. So some of the movies that came out recently, like 1917 or others, really interesting to see the stories, but they're a little bit more set in reality than perhaps Maverick and Goose. Inverted.
Well, you've clearly gotten my intellectual prowess, my level, my capacity. Thank you. I was struggling for the words there.
All right, so maybe we can hit a home run on the last one.
We do. So, little known fact, Matt, but you're talking to, not me, but Mark is also an alumni of Boston University.
Yes, go Terriers.
There we go.
Yeah, and so I believe Howard Stern to be the most notable and iconic alumni ever to graduate from Boston University. Sure thing or not a sure thing?
I think that's a sure thing. I can't think of anybody else I would put up on that list. Mark and myself excluded.
Well,
I
thank you.
knew I happened to do a little bit of research on this one.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So listen to the list of notable BU alumni, Matt. I think you might get a kick out of this. Pee Wee Herman,
Oh, wow.
George Costanza, also known as Jason Alexander, some famous actresses, Julianne Moore,
Wow.
Gina Davis, Spock himself, Leonard Nimoy, Andy Cohen of Bravo fame, and Howard Stern. But I think I may have found someone
Oh,
to
no,
trump Howard Stern.
I just looked at your sheet. We just missed
Matt, did you know that Martin Luther King went to Boston University?
I did not know that.
Yeah, so I think he probably takes the prize there.
I'll give you that one over Howard Stern.
Okay,
there you go.
You got it. You got it.
Matt, thank you so much for joining us. This was such a fantastic conversation. I think whether you are coming up in the automotive business or you are a dealer owner or a principal, there is something that you've learned and taken away to help improve your journey with your career.
Yeah, no, thank you, Matt. I definitely enjoyed the conversation here. It was a lot of fun, and hopefully everyone is aware. But JM&A Group has a relationship with Predictive Index, and our team, our dealer talent service team, works very closely with Predictive Index and helps to bring a lot of these concepts to life that Matt described in dealership.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Ellie, because I personally have used Predictive Index on our team as we have hired new associates, and it is fantastic. So I would highly recommend, I'd highly recommend anyone checking that out to help grow their business, grow their employee retention, and finding the right people for the right roles, because I think that's a key element that you mentioned, Matt.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate that. I mean, every business is a people business, and we're just very proud and honored to be able to help JM&A with yours.
There you have it, from the
All right,
Godfather himself.
The Godfather himself. Thanks so much, Matt. Take care.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Matt.